This is scary. A leading economist has made quite a grim prediction about the Australian property market. Today, I'm going to go through exactly what he had to say. I'm then going to share some data with you to show you whether what he has to say is actually realistic or if it's just a clickbait-based headline. And then I'm going to sum it all up and show you what it means for you, whether you're already in the property market or thinking of buying your first property. Let's dive in. Hello, it's Nero here, and if you're new to my channel, hit that subscribe button because I talk about all things related to the property market and the economy. Despite tens of billions of dollars being spent to address Australia's crippling housing crisis, a top economist has delivered a stark assessment of how long it will take to turn the tide. And it's not good news for those battling skyrocketing rents and runaway home prices. Shankar Ramakrishnan is an economist and finance consulting who has worked at the front lines of Sydney's real estate sector for decades. Mr. Ramakrishnan says he's never seen things quite this bad. Things are really tough out there, whether someone is trying to buy their first home or struggling with the cost of renting a home, he said. Unfortunately, I don't see an end in sight, not for at least another 10 years. And I think he's right. Have a look at the building approvals right now and how many properties we're building. Here we have data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and what you can see is that the number of properties being built right now is about the same as back in 2012, 12 years ago. But our population, though, has grown significantly since then, and the rate of growth of population continues to increase. And on a global scale, the number of properties we're building, the amount of supply we're bringing online is amongst the lowest in the world relative to our population. Here we have a chart looking at Australia's level of housing supply, dwellings per 1,000 people. And what you can see is that Australia on a global scale is the 11th worst in the world. The countries that have it worse than us are countries like Ireland, New Zealand, and Costa Rica. But we're way below the OECD average. Australia ranked 22 out of 33 OECD countries, as I said, the 11th worst, when it came to providing housing, the recent federal budget said, warning undersupply was a key factor driving increases in rents, mortgage repayments, and house prices. While Australia's housing supply increased from 403 dwellings per 1,000 people in 2011 to 420 per 1,000 people by 2022, the country failed to keep pace with international peers and the OECD average, the federal budget paper noted. But hold on, if we're building more homes per 1,000 people than we were back in 2011, how can the housing crisis be worse? Well, that question was answered by the Assistant Reserve Bank Governor Sarah Hunter in her recent address. Right now, just under 27 million people live in Australia, in about 11 million households. The average number of people living in each household has trended lower, from around 2.8 in the mid-1980s to around 2.5 of late. This may sound like a small change, but if for some small reason average household size rose back to 2.8, we would need 1.2 million fewer dwellings to house our current population. No small difference. So the housing crisis is actually made up of two factors. Number one, we're not building enough properties for a rapidly growing population. And we've got fewer people on average living in each household. But this second factor is not getting enough airtime, and I expect it's going to get even worse and contribute even more to our housing crisis in the coming few years. Here's what Curtin University economics professor Rachel Ong-Vifor said. She said that data showed Australia had an average of 2.5 people per dwelling, which we know. The number one country for supply, Italy, had about 600 dwellings per 1,000 people, but that only equated to 1.7 people per household. Australia is a relatively young nation compared to Italy, she said. Therefore, we would have larger households with young children. She goes on to say that as our country gets older, we'll have fewer and fewer people on average living in each household. So the number of people per household is going to fall further below where it's at 2.5, which means we're going to need more properties just for the number of people we have in this country, let alone catering for immigration. And that undersupply of properties is already forcing property prices higher. The median property price in Australia has risen for 16 months in a row, and yet more and more people are jumping into the market because they don't want to miss out, because they can see that there just aren't enough properties. One of the big motivating factors for buyers appears to be a fear of missing out. Fear of missing out used to be a multi-month phenomenon that peaks around the spring selling season, but now it's a multi-year event. That's why I called it FOMO on steroids, says Warren Hogan, Chief Economic Advisor at Judo Bank. The perception, I would say fact, that there is a massive shortage of homes motivates people to do whatever they can to get into the housing market, no matter how ridiculously expensive houses are. People have the view that the shortage is going to last for a long time, and that will mean prices will just continue to rise. And it's not just fear of prices going up by 3% the next 3 weeks, it's the expectation that prices will go up by 20% in the next 2 to 3 years. Hogan says the record population growth in the past year exacerbated a pandemic-fueled undersupply, which he expects to increase to around 300,000 homes in the next 18 months. AMP Chief Economist Shane Oliver has already showed us that we have an existing undersupply of 200,000 homes. And now Mr. Hogan expects that to increase by 50% in the next 18 months. What do you think that will do to property prices? What do you think that will do to rents? Even assuming there's a pickup in building activity, we're still more than a year's supply short, which means the undersupply is not a passing fad. It's here to stay for some time, he says. Now, a word of caution. Just because building approvals are falling and that we have virtually no chance of hitting the government's target of 1.2 million homes in 5 years, and just because our population is increasing so dramatically, meaning that overall in the country we have way more demand than supply, that does not mean it applies everywhere. Have a look at this next chart from CoreLogic. This chart tracks surplus stock versus capital growth. And what you can see here is that the dotted orange line is the divider. If you look at what's above the line, so areas like Hobart, regional Victoria, these are areas that are in oversupply, and that's why we're not seeing property prices rise in those areas. But then if we look at areas like Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, even Sydney, you can see that these markets are undersupplied, and the greater the degree of undersupply, the greater the property price growth. And on that chart, you could see that they're even looking at other regional markets, saying some are oversupplied, some are undersupplied. I wouldn't pay that too much heed, because in that chart, CoreLogic is lumping all the state's regional markets together and saying they're equal. That's not actually the case. For example, if you take regional Queensland, there are certain markets where prices are rocketing along. There are multiple offers per property. They're in huge undersupply. But also in regional Queensland, there are areas where properties are sitting on the market for weeks and months on end. They're actually in somewhat of an oversupply. We're not seeing much growth in those markets. So you can't just say a regional market is a regional market. You've got to look further. Certain regional markets are doing way better than others. Same with the capital cities. So my word of caution is, just because demand is higher than supply overall in Australia, just because we have a chronic shortage which is going to keep driving property prices higher, it's going to keep driving rents higher, which, mind you, is a big part of the reason why so many investors are jumping into the market right now. That does not mean you can buy blindly. That does not mean you can just buy anywhere and expect to make money. You do need to do your research. You do need to do your due diligence. And if you want help with that, check out the link in the description below to get totally for free the digital version and audio version of my book. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.